May 30th, 2008, The Strangers movie was released in theaters. Bryan Bertino is the one who wrote and directed this horror movie. While the story for The Strangers movie is fictional, the film was inspired by true events from Bertino's childhood. In a Collider's Extras interview, Bryan Bertino stated that one time when he was left alone with his sister at their house that was in the middle of nowhere, he said in his own words that one night while our parents were out, somebody knocked on our front door. We later found out that these people were knocking on doors in the street with the idea that whoever didn't open the door, they would kick in the door and rob the place. My little sister at 7 years old actually answered the door and saw these people and talked to them, and they asked for some fake name or something, and she didn't know who. And I remember even back then, like, God, if they had kicked in the door, what would we have done? When Bryan Bertino was around 11 or 12 years old, he was handed a book called Helter Skelter, created by Vincent Bugliosi and Kurt Gentry by his father. The book was about the true story of the Manson murders that took place in 1969. What inspired Bertino to make The Strangers wasn't Charles Manson, it was actually looking at the murders from the victim's perspective. Movies like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shining, and The Exorcist also inspired him to make this film come to life. He wanted to tell a story from the point of view of someone that we read about in the obituary. Obituary means the newspaper, if you guys did not know. Nowadays, you can read about almost anything you really are interested online. And now this brings me to the actual movie. Kristen, who was played by Liv Tyler, and James, played by Scott Speedman, are expecting a relaxing weekend at a family vacation home, but their stay turns out to be anything but peaceful. A mysterious and dangerous woman knocks their door, and the real danger shows up in the form of three masked torturers, leaving Kristen and James struggling for survival. In this video, I will be speaking to you about what made The Strangers movie scary. Without further ado, let's get started. I was about 11 years old when I first got to see this movie. I never actually did see the trailer before I got to see the movie, but I kind of already knew it was going to be a horror movie by the title of the film alone. I just had the feeling. Think about it. When you meet a person you're not familiar with, in this case, a stranger, you're not sure how things will turn out. This movie was one of the first few horror movies I remember watching when I was young. I watched it over at my aunt's house, and I gotta say, the movie for its time was actually pretty good. It's questionable today because the horror movie genre has shifted pretty much away from house invasion type horror films. I saw this movie a few days ago, and I have to say, the movie is still fun to watch. I still find the three strangers very creepy. I couldn't imagine how Kristen and James felt when they were being terrorized by these three masked murderers. Kristen and James were leaving their friend's wedding reception in the car. Keep in mind, the house where they were staying at was in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking about the countryside, where you mostly don't see any huge buildings or barely any people, not even many streetlights or moving cars in the middle of the night. Kristen was crying on the way home because earlier James proposed to her and she told him the magic word that he wanted to hear. No, James got rejected by his girlfriend. I got you there, right? Anyways, he thought that since one of his friends is getting married tonight, he thought it would be the perfect time to propose to the girl he loves, but fortunately he got rejected. The reason being is because Kristen believes she is not ready for marriage. He even set up the house as a romantic display with flowers around the couch and all over the house. When they both got to James' house, Kristen told him she liked all the decorations and asked when he found the time to set up everything. James answered and said that his friend Mike helped him out when Kristen was out with her friends. With all the effort James made to set up all the decorations, it still didn't change the fact she told him no when he proposed to her, and he was still upset. They both had to stay over the night while they were processing where their relationship was at this point in time. Over at the table, He wanted her to take the ring because he felt like he didn't have any use for it anymore. He didn't want to take it back and wanted her to keep it. She told him, "I want to wear this. You know, I only get to wear it tonight. It makes me feel pretty." And James said to her, "You're pretty." Kristen then told him, "I'm so sorry it wasn't the way you thought it was going to be. Really sorry." "What do we do now?" asked James. Kristen said, "I don't know," in a very low voice. "I'm just not ready yet." After this moment, James stood up and walked away from his girlfriend. He felt embarrassed that Kristen turned down his proposal. She stood and went where James was standing. Kristen needed time to figure out what she wanted to do, but it's important to mention where their relationship stands at this point in time, because their relationship was about to get tested for the remainder of the movie. Right before they were about to make up, they were then interrupted by a very loud knocking on the door. They were both shocked that someone was knocking on their door in the middle of the night. It was 1:21 a.m. in the morning, and it's definitely not normal for someone to be knocking at this time of night. James opened the door, and it was a woman who knocked. The lady asked, "Is Tamara here?" James said, "No, you got the wrong house." "You sure?" said the mysterious woman. "Yeah, I'm sorry," James told the lady. The last thing the lady said to them was very chilling. She took a 5-second break and said to the couple, "See you later," just casually. Someone that is asking you for a person that you don't know of and doesn't live in your house in the middle of the night is just very suspicious and creepy. Kristen mentioned to James that she was out of cigarettes, and James told her he was going to go get her some more. Before he left, he lit a fire so Kristen won't be as cold. Kristen decided to wear the ring that was given to her by her boyfriend. It was supposed to be the night they got engaged, but just for tonight, like she said to James when they were at the table, she decided to wear it because it made her feel pretty. Apparently after James left, things started to get worse for Kristen because the mysterious lady came back and started knocking the front door once again. She asked the same question, if Tamara was home, and Kristen said she has already passed by this house. Since Kristen didn't open the door this time, the stranger who was knocking at the door constantly and her two other friends were about to break in and get inside the house to hurt Kristen. But not just only hurt Kristen, they wanted to also kill her. Kristen was in danger since she was home alone and James wasn't home yet. It didn't even take that long for them to break in. It first started with the man with the mask just casually walking into the living room while Kristen was getting a drink of water. He was just staring at her for a good 20 seconds or so, and once she turned around, he was no longer there. The way the three killers stalk both Kristen and James in this movie is just scary, plain and simple. This wasn't the only time the killers creeped up on them either. When Kristen was hiding inside the closet from the masked killers, the man with the mask was looking for her, and it was just a very scary moment to witness in a movie, because when you watch the movie for the first time, you're wondering if the main character was going to get caught or not, or was she going to stay hidden and the killers will go by past her not knowing where she was hiding. Unfortunately, Kristen was found, but as of right now, we're kind of ahead of ourselves, so let's backtrack a little bit. I believe that the killers blocked the smoke from leaving the chimney. That is why the house was getting covered with it, and the alarm started sounding. Kristen took out the alarm so it could stop making noise, but she accidentally dropped the device on the floor because the lady kept banging at the door, and Kristen got scared that she started to call James. She was getting really worried. After she drank her water, she noticed that the alarm device was placed on the chair. She remembered that she accidentally dropped the device on the floor and never picked it up. She then noticed that the lady outside must have gotten inside the house somehow, but wasn't sure how she did it. Throughout this time, Kristen was holding a knife in her hand because she was afraid that the people might come out running and do something to her. Kristen started hearing scraping noises outside the house, and slowly she started walking close to the window and when she finally looked outside, she saw the masked man and she started to scream out loud. She got scared and things were about to get worse. She must have hit the record player by accident because the music started to play in a loop over and over again. With the record player repeating, there was also the loud banging at the door, and Kristen ran into the room to hide. She was grabbing the lamplight and she must have cut herself somehow with it. She was on the floor crying and telling them to go away, and then around 10 seconds later, the music stopped. The person who stopped the record player was James. Kristen tells James of what had just occurred ever since he left. They both searched the house to see if the killers were hidden inside. They didn't find anybody. Kristen's phone was thrown to the fire so they wouldn't be able to call the police for help. The strangers outside were just getting started. Remember I mentioned the killers like to play with their prey? Well, the lady with the doll face mask was just staring right at the window where James and Kristen were looking at. When both Kristen and James looked back at the window, the lady with the doll face mask was already gone. James wanted to speak to the lady once and for all so he could see what she wanted, but he noticed his window was broken into and he knew that him and Kristen were in great danger. He hasn't seen any car pass, nor has heard a dog bark close to where they were staying at. It was only them two and the three killer psychos who were trying to get in their house. This was a very scary situation for them and for me when I was first viewing the movie for the very first time, because they were in the middle of nowhere. This made them feel helpless, and it was now time for them to get out as fast as they could. They tried to drive away from the house, but the killers stopped them from going anywhere. The man with the mask was standing right in front of this car, so they wouldn't leave. And when they tried to reverse the car, there was another killer who was driving a truck. She had a pinup mask and she collided with their car. Both James and Kristen got out of their car as fast as they could, and they went back inside the house. James and Kristen no longer had a car to get away from the strangers, and now they only had one option left. The only option they had left was to survive. The strangers weren't going to leave them alone, because a few moments later, when James was getting his shotgun ready, the strangers started to break the door. Kristen and James tried to block them from coming in using furniture they had, but it wasn't going to hold long though. James shot a bullet at the door, but didn't quite hit any target. The strangers were toying with them very heavily. Kristen and James both hid in the smallest room in the house, where the strangers couldn't come in from. The room only had one door and no windows where they were staying at. James was pointing a gun straight toward the door. He was ready to shoot and kill anybody that tried to get them. This is when James' friend Mike came in early to pick him up. One of the strangers threw a rock at his window, and his friend got scared and noticed that something was very wrong. He was walking slowly inside the house. We got to see the woman with a doll mask creeped up to the light from the shadows. While Mike was searching for Kristen and James, the man with the mask was ready to kill Mike if he ever turned around. As a first time viewer, when you're watching, you're hoping that he didn't turn around so the man in the mask wouldn't kill him. It turns out what killed him was actually his own friend, James. By accident, James thought Mike was one of the killers and he shot him by accident. James was caught in the moment and he thought he got one of them. Unfortunately, he didn't. James was running out of ideas of what he could do. He had one last resort, and it was that he had to get to the radio that was at the barn. James remembers he had a radio at the barn where they could reach anyone for help. That was their next task. James told Kristen to stay in the house and that he was going to go to the barn and try to make contact with anyone he could. Unfortunately, James got caught by the masked man. He sneaked up behind him when he was about to shoot the woman with the pinup mask. Back at the house, Kristen was waiting for James to come back, but once she heard a raspy breathing by the masked man, she started to run to the barn. By accident, Kristen tripped and fell into the grass. She was then crawling to the barn as fast as she could. When she heard movement getting closer and closer, she turned around and nothing was there. The woman with the pinup mask was getting closer to her, but then she disappeared really fast. Kristen made it to the barn. She was very close to making contact on the radio, but the lady with the pinup mask destroyed the radio before she could make any contact. While Kristen was crawling back to the house, she saw that the killer cycles were staring at her. The killers already knew that they had her and that she had nowhere else to go or run to. All hope was really lost when she noticed that their car was getting burned up. There was nothing much Kristen could do. James was nowhere to be seen and no help was coming to save her. And now it brings me to the part where she was hiding from the masked man in the closet. He noticed that she was hidden inside there, and somehow when Kristen was poking her eyes to see what was going on in the living room, the lady with the doll face mask scared her to death. The ruckus stopped. Kristen went out and opened the closet door slowly and went out to face the lady with the doll face mask once and for all. Kristen asked, "Why are you doing this to us?" The lady said, "You're going to die." Kristen saw that James was alive but was taken hostage by the man in the mask. He couldn't go anywhere. James was yelling out to Kristen that she needed to run away as fast as she could, but she was trapped and there was no way out. When she was heading to the door, she was then caught by the masked man. She was getting dragged into the living room, and now we fast forward to the next day when it's already morning. The killers tied both Kristen and James up, and there was no escape anymore for these two. Again, Kristen asked the masked murderers why were they doing this. Her question was then answered, but it's not what you would expect the answer to ever be. "Because you were home," said the woman in the doll mask. There really wasn't an actual motive why the strangers were doing this to Kristen and James. They were picked at random, and I believe this is what makes the scariest thing about the Strangers movie. It can completely happen to anyone at any given time. Unfortunately, Kristen and James were the ones that were next. The three revealed their faces to them, but not to the audience. And then the three of them took a turn stabbing the couple one by one. Kristen and James were at their last few moments. They just had each other at the moment and no one else. You hear the screams while the camera is showing outdoor scenes of the countryside. There were these two kids who were with the church that came in contact with the killers. The killers stopped their truck to speak with them. One of the boys asked the lady if she was the sinner. She took a 5-second pause and said, "Sometimes." Again, very chilling and scary. The movie actually started with the teenage boys finding that the car was broken into and also the house. Now this time it showed that they found both Kristen and James laying down. James was dead, but Kristen was still alive when one of the boys was about to touch her shoulder. Kristen screamed, and that is how the movie finished. It's a really great movie to watch, but coming back to this movie years later, it feels kinda outdated because the technology has advanced. The phones the characters were using in the movie are cell phones that people no longer use today in 2022. Everyone now has a smartphone or any touchscreen phone. Again, not to take anything away from the Strangers movie, it's still a great movie. This film is far better than the sequel, the one that came out in 2018. Probably for 2028, we might get a third Strangers movie. Who knows though? Who knows? Thank you for watching this video though. This has been what made the Strangers 2008 movie scary. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. For the past few years, I have created a playlist about anything horror related that I have been interested in speaking about. Give this and that horror playlist a shot and maybe you'll find something that you really like. As always guys, thank you so much for watching and live to the fullest.